I'm having a crazy month, and I'm not going to be surprised if the rest of the world is too. It's November, the holiday season is upon us. If you're here in the US, you are gearing up for all of the holidays, including Thanksgiving. And it's exhausting. So during the Booktubeathon, I picked up Wilder Girls by Rory Power, and I put it off for a hot minute until I got to Dublin, and on the plane ride there, which was like an ungodly amount of time, this is what I read. This is a book that's gotten a lot of hype, but it is enjoyable. It's fast-paced. I think it's a really good romp, and I figured like this is worth diving into. The story follows 4 girls who are going to a boarding school called the Raxter School for Girls. And when they're there, suddenly there is a mysterious illness that overtakes the island. It has a horrifying effect. It does things like makes you grow extra spines and turns your hands into claws. And for every girl, the manifestation of this illness is different. It's horrifying. The CDC has isolated them, and now it's just kind of a bunch of girls and their 2 teachers alone on this island, hoping that they make it through. I'm gonna go ahead and say, I didn't realize that this was a Lord of the Flies retelling, but once someone said that, I was like, oh, I see it. And it was in that pleasant way where it's not that kind of clear-cut retelling, right? It's not like being told Cinderella for the 100th time where you can spot the elements immediately. It has enough of its own twist on the story that I think it was still novel while capturing the essence at the same time of Lord of the Flies. One of the biggest things that this book has going for it is the atmospheric quality. The story has a pretty strong underlying tension. There's no clear idea of who this illness is gonna claim next, who it's gonna kill, whether anyone's coming for help, if they even are getting any attention paid to their case. And all the while these girls are doing things like trying to fight giant mutant monsters that have taken over their woods. Because the tox doesn't just affect them, it is affecting every living creature. I think Power does a really good job of drawing that tension in the underlying story and narrative. Her descriptions are pretty vivid and really do a good job of conveying that urgency that I think underlies a lot of the girls' behaviors. That aspect of the story I think is really strong. I think overall the pacing is pretty fast, it's engaging, and there's kind of something about to happen at every turn. At the same time, I think the story also shows a lot of room for growth. There are 4 main girl characters, all of whom have this kind of intertwined friendship, romance, frenemy kind of deal going on. And each of them comes with their own set of baggage. I think one of the things that I found really to be the hardest part of the book for me was that the tone of voice of a couple of the girls really sounded the same. So there wasn't a clear delineation in the character voice, even though the character traits perhaps were different. And that's an area I think that I am encouraged, because I think that that's an area where Power can grow and where her prose and deliberation style will benefit, especially if her next book is a single point of view. It's really hard to do, I think, 4 points of view really well. There's really only 2 main points of view, but a couple others show up. It's a lot to juggle, especially in a first novel. One of the things I actually really liked about this book is that it doesn't try too hard to explain what's going on. The threat of this tox is existential to these girls, but it doesn't, it's not a story about them finding out what causes it. It is a story about them reacting to what is going on in their daily life. And I think that that is really working to Power's advantage in this. First and foremost, because I think that is a much more natural reaction for 16-year-old girls to be like, what do I do now? Instead of trying to like undercover some, I don't know, giant conspiracy about why they're ill. And it also means that she gets to kind of hand wave at a lot of those science fiction elements that maybe are harder to convey, especially if you're not used to writing a story about pandemics. You know, there are people in the world who are really, really good at writing about epidemics and disease outbreak, and while this gets the tone of those stories right, the logistics of that is really hard to convey unless you're, you know, somebody who's done it a couple times, or maybe you're writing at the detail and for the audience that is like Michael Crichton's audience. And I think in doing that, it lets her focus instead on the impact that the story has on the main characters. I think it lets her really explore the consequence very, very well, as opposed to getting too preoccupied with trying to explain away what's happened, which would also take away that sense of urgency that I mentioned earlier that I think builds the atmosphere so well. The other big weakness that I found in this is, again, one that I think shows a lot of promise for Power's writing journey overall. Some of the characters' motivations I thought were a little lacking. This is not so much an issue with the kind of main point of view character, but is very much one with the others, who there just isn't enough time to develop it, and certainly isn't enough time spent exploring those motivations. All of the point of views are written first person perspective, which I have issues with first person perspective if you're doing more than one character. But I think that the thought process behind a lot of what motivates them is there and is visible. It's just not fleshed out. And so I'm really encouraged by that. I think it'll be really interesting to see how that kind of grows in her next book. I don't know what her next book will be, but I think that this shows a lot of promise. And I think that's really the takeaway from Wilder Girls, is that it's engaging, it's atmospheric, it's a fun read, and really what the important part is that it shows promise. A new voice on the scene who's really maybe someone to watch and someone to keep an eye on. It's not a knockout perfect debut, but it is definitely enjoyable. I know some people were concerned that this might be too gory, and there are a couple gory moments, but I didn't think it was anything, I don't know, out of hand. The characters themselves, I think, have some horrible things happening to them, but it's not anything where you're like seeing graphic depictions and descriptions of like compound fractures or something. It's mostly just telling you what has happened to their body and occasionally how that has made their body feel. But I don't know. I mean, I'm interested to see what you guys think, especially now that, you know, I think this book's gotten around a little bit. People have had a time to think and the hype has died down. I'm really interested to see what you think about this story, what you think about the girls involved, where you see Power going with her next novel, and anything like recommendations. I enjoy this kind of like YA horror subgenre. That's something that I'm like endlessly fascinated with, especially because it's horror tailored towards girls, and that's just kind of less common. So if you have any recommendations for like YA horror, I'm really interested in that. But you guys know the drill. Go ahead, leave a comment down below, like the video, subscribe, share it around. You can go ahead and follow me on Twitter and Instagram. I am of course active over in both of those places. And you know, if you feel so inclined and want to leave a tip in the tip jar, you can go ahead and hang out with me on Patreon. My Patreon levels start at $1 a month, which, you know, less than a candy bar. I like to think I'm cooler than a candy bar. You know, keep an eye out here because I'll have new videos coming. I'm actually hoping this week to have a couple of videos in the pipeline all about Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. I'm going to be talking about trigger warnings. I'm going to be talking about sexism in literature, and then I'm gonna do an actual review of this bad boy. So keep an eye out for those. I hope you guys are having a fantastic reading week. I'm gonna talk to you later. Bye.